Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of The Wager by David Grann. This is a book that came out in 2023. It's a historical fiction from Doubleday. I got this book from my library. An absolutely enthralling story, The Wager is an excellent historical fiction with a very interesting narrative structure. So what is it about? On January 28, 1742, a ramshackle vessel of patched-together wood and cloth washed up on the coast of Brazil. Inside were 30 emaciated men, barely alive, and they had an extraordinary tale to tell. They were survivors of His Majesty's ship the Wager, a British vessel that had left England in 1740 on a secret mission during an imperial war with Spain. While the Wager had been chasing a Spanish treasure-filled galleon known as the Prize of All the Oceans, it had wrecked on a desolate island off the coast of Patagonia. The men, after being marooned for months and facing starvation, built the flimsy craft and sailed for more than 100 days, traversing nearly 3,000 miles of storm-racked seas. They were greeted as heroes. But then, 6 months later, another, even more decrepit craft landed on the coast of Chile. This boat contained just 3 castaways, and they told a very different story. The 30 sailors who landed in Brazil were not heroes, they were mutineers. The first group responded with countercharges of their own, of a tyrannical and murderous senior officer and his henchmen. It became clear that while stranded on the island, the crew had fallen into anarchy, with warring factions fighting for dominion over the barren wilderness. As accusations of treachery and murder flew, the Admiralty convened a court-martial to determine who was telling the truth. The stakes were life and death, for whomever the court found guilty could hang. That was very long, but you kind of need that going into it. As you know, if you follow my channel, I love boats. I love sailing ships. I'm not very partial to cruise ships as they destroy the ocean, but the main draw of the novel for me was the aspect of sailing. I read Moby Dick and I actually liked the minutiae of the sailing parts. I thought that was really interesting. If I lived back then, and was a man, of course, I'd love to be a sailor. I just love the ocean. I just love it. I love... Anyway, I could go on forever and ever about how much I love the ocean and boating and stuff, so I'll stop. The fascinating thing about this historical fiction, though, aside from the boats, is how it's told. Rather than putting the book in a point of view of a character, the story has both a typical narrator and is interjected with quotes from primary sources. Journals of the real people were a huge part in determining what actually happened on the island, and while some of the motivations of what occurred in the moment are conjecture, the inclusion of this sort of proof made the story more immersive because it reminded you in the entire time that this was based on a true story, and an absolutely wild true story at that. It was so cool how this book was put together. I really, really enjoyed it. And despite this sort of breaking of the fourth wall, the book still manages to give personality to the characters. We have Bukele, Captain Cheap, and 16-year-old Lord Byron, who have the main focus. The first two due to their leadership, and the third because we'd all recognize the name Lord Byron. He was actually the grandfather of the poet. They never met, apparently, but the older Byron's journey on the Wager is the subject of some of Byron's work, so I thought that was a really cool way to tie it into real life. Another excellent thing about the novel is that you can understand the two rivals' perspectives and why they did what they did, as Grann also brings in information from today about studies like how hunger can affect your decision making and how ailments were understood back then, not at all, to help us understand the mindsets of the people a lot more. Also, Byron is a sweetheart. I just loved him. It also didn't help that he was pretty much a child when the book took place, so a lot of the emotion of the story comes through his perspective, and I thought that was really a good way to do it, because you really do feel bad for the poor guy. The pacing is excellent. It's sort of a blend of seafaring and survivalism, as well as a study into how small groups devise and adhere to leadership. Does the naval hierarchy still exist in a shipwreck? What happens if the captain, what if he sucks? Is it a mutiny or is it survival? And these questions aren't really answered. It's kind of more like these questions are posed through this book as an example of how social structures break down when you're taken out of the situation that those structures were created in. I thought that was a really, really fascinating and interesting thing. Another great aspect was how colonialism was approached in the book. Previously, 10 years ago even probably, stories like this would have been likely framed as, courageous adventures into the unknown by intrepid men. Instead, Grann shows us how the indigenous groups who had learned how to survive in these hostile environments the British, were floundering in, were amenable to helping the sailors. Colonialism is also critiqued quite often in the narrative itself, which is a refreshing perspective. We can still enjoy stories set during this time while acknowledging the systemic and societal problems that these time periods had. In fact, there are some heartbreaking aspects of the story in regards to not only colonialism but slavery too. And it's clear that Grann does not consider the colonialist aspects and even the war that the two nations were fighting, which was a ridiculous war anyway, anything but asinine and ridiculous. This book, if you couldn't tell, is impeccably detailed, and even though there are no women in the book, except for a passing mention of Byron's sister and some indigenous muscle divers, I still really enjoyed it, and that's saying a lot. Historical seafaring stories are one of the few settings where I permit the lack of women's perspectives, as it makes historical sense, and I just love the ocean. I do wish, though, someone would write a book about those two pirates. You know, that would be so cool, those two women pirates. I can't remember their names. Molly is one of them. And then, anyway, I have a children's book about them, but so I wish someone would write a novel. Anyway, this story is fast-paced. I found it absolutely riveting. I flew through it, and I am definitely going to check out Grann's other books. Read this book if you want a great historical fiction which isn't super long, has characters you grow to care for, you know, is based on a true event, is impeccably researched and uses primary sources, and gives you a deep look into ship diseases such as scurvy, because aren't we all interested in that? I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. So thanks for watching.